Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the breakout session. I'm Willow Fiddler. I'm a staff reporter for the Globe and Mail. I am based out of Thunder Bay, which is in northwestern Ontario, covering the Northern Ontario region. I come from Treaty 5 territory in northwestern Ontario. My home community is Sandy Lake. I am happy to be moderating this breakout session. It's super exciting to see all of the young people here, the new generation, next-gen energy leaders. As is the case in most of Canada, across Canada, our population is aging. This means that current employers, employees, and leaders in the energy section are approaching retirement. But beyond that, engaging Indigenous youth is a part of healing. It contributes to stronger communities, opens up new jobs and career opportunities, and helps ensure clean energy projects move forward with Indigenous knowledge and capacity. So we have a great group of next-gen leaders here to discuss these ideas. I'll introduce them. First, we have Alexandra Thompson. She is the Senior Director of Youth Programs with Indigenous Clean Energy, also known as ICE. Alexandra's passion is advancing Indigenous resurgence in climate and energy. She has dedicated her career to enabling pathways towards socioeconomic equity and restoration of sustainable, healthy, and culturally rich livelihoods in Indigenous communities. Welcome, Alexandra. Next, we have Misquaquan. Did I say that right? Misquaquan. James Harper, Business Development Manager with North Star, an energy storage company. There, he is a champion for developing large-scale energy storage and clean microgrid projects in a way that empowers communities and contributes to meaningful climate action. Welcome, Misquaquan. And last but not least, we have Robert Burns, the 7th-Gen Manager with Student Energy. He assists the 7th-Gen Youth Council in supporting Indigenous youth to advance a sustainable and equitable energy future. Robert is currently in his final year of Indigenous Studies at the University of British Columbia. Bonjour, Robert. So we'll start I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves in whatever context you feel like, where you're from, in your own language if you like. Alexandra, we'll start with
you. Good day. My name is Alexandra. I am a Nakota woman. I belong to Chegakin First Nation, that's Carry the Kettle First Nation, located in Treaty 4 territory in what is known as Saskatchewan, Canada. So as mentioned, one of my roles in life is in the work that I do as a director overseeing our youth programming at Indigenous Clean Energy. Oh, that's a lot of feedback. Is that better? So I oversee our youth programs at the moment. I will say my title does not include senior in it, although I might use that to maybe look at the salary grid. Future senior director. Gotta know my manifesting. I'm all about the manifestations. So that's a little bit about me. My background is in chemical engineering. I graduated from the University of Saskatchewan. I did work in the field as a process engineer and project coordinator for a number of years, and then I switched over to the clean energy sector, and I've been exposed to this wonderful world, and I'm really happy to contribute to today's discussion.
Thank you, Alexandra. Misquaquan, James.
By the way, engineers, do we have your ring?
I took it off. Sometimes I take it off.
Okay. We'll come back to that. Yeah. We're also both Sagittarius people, so we're at peak power. It's our season right now. Her birthday is coming up this week. I was just celebrating my 30th birthday on Friday. So this is probably the last youth panel that I'll be a part of. Senior youth, that's right. I want to know the pay on that one. Yeah, so as Willow mentioned, yeah, my name is Muskukwan James Harper. I'm from Sturgeon Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 8 territory. I live in Winnipeg in Treaty 1. And yeah, my full-time job is with Enerstore Incorporated. We are an energy storage developer bringing the wonders of a brilliant net zero future across the country and doing it in good partnerships, making sure that we take that approach with every single project we do. Aside from that too, I'm a very busy person. I'm also on the board with Indigenous Clean Energy. I'm also the co-chair for 7Gen, where we empower Indigenous young people into clean energy futures, among several many other initiatives that we'll get more into through the panel. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Robert.
I'm Gitxsan First Nation and Houtsik First Nation. It's definitely been a journey coming out this way, so very grateful to make our way here. My traditional name is Sawalaksa Galiax. It means learner of our history, knowledge of the river's edge. Yeah, as mentioned, I'm a student, just currently finishing off my last year practicum for Indigenous Studies. But I'm also a student of this industry. I'm fortunate to be able to share the stage with these folks here today because my development came from my engagement within the clean energy industry. I came from a community development aspect, and I've been working with youth and urban Indigenous communities and Indigenous communities for a long time now. So I'm very grateful to be able to find the through lines for clean energy solutions and be able to get youth engaged and connected with those things. So very grateful to be here. Hamia.
Miigwech. So we will just get into some questions, and I will promise to leave some time at the end for questions this time. Alexandra, let's start with you. Tell me a bit about what motivates you to do the work you do, and what are the goals you're hoping to achieve, and why do they matter?
It's a big question. Big question. I think even as I was going through university and sort of navigating chemical engineering, I had always thought of how can I blend Western sciences with, the Indigenous understanding of natural law, and how can that truly benefit our where do I fit, in this world? How do I bridge those two different ways of seeing, different ways of living, kind of together, so that we can live in, a more harmonious way. And so I graduated. Initially, I wanted to work in water, but I ended up, working for my community, doing some project development work, doing some electrical upgrades, doing some infrastructure work, getting my experience contributing there. I did, run into real world challenges that you're quite naive to when you're young, with politics kind of changing and shifting and relationships changing with, with the community and with partners and with business. And I saw things kind of shift and things didn't go the way that I had hoped that they would. So I winded up going into process engineering, and I actually worked in oil and gas for a couple years, and I did that because I wanted to gain the technical knowledge. I felt like I needed kind of that expertise before I could move, out of that sector and contribute whatever I had gained in that sector to my community. And so all of that happened quite a lot faster than I thought it would, with the pandemic hitting and, jobs kind of going up and down in that sector as well. It's quite volatile, and so I do see the need to kind of diversify our portfolios, our energy portfolios, our business portfolios, all of those things. And I took that as an opportunity to dive into something different, where I'm going back to community and assisting our communities really participate in project development, in leading projects. And I was very inspired by the work that ICE had already been doing, what they had already established. I saw this, posting with Muskogwin was a part of the 7 Gen Youth Council, developing this initiative to get Indigenous young people involved in energy projects, in leading their own projects and envisioning their own projects, whether that's small scale, community scale, utility scale. And I thought, wow, you know, this is something that's really missing from society in general and in this sector. And so I thought, you know, maybe I can utilize my skills and experience to contribute and help uplift our communities.
Amazing, amazing.
May I add to that
You
too?
can.
So Alexandra is a wonderful human being and very, very smart and competent in running the Imagination program. The program came from the idea that when we were running the summits for the 7 Gen summits, where we gathered 200 Indigenous young people every 2 years or so, we noticed that we wanted a little bit more of a legacy for Indigenous young people to feel supported and embark on their own initiatives in their own communities. And thus, Imagination was born. And it was sort of our young youth council as 7 Gen taking on pretty much the design and implementation of an entirely new program that's like worth at least hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in funding and in operational costs. And then we also had to do a hiring process. And I'm so glad that our paths crossed through that, because now I can call Alexandra my very good friend.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Ms. Gawkwin, can you continue and maybe tell us a bit about your career so far in the energy sector? I understand that you started out as an intern.
Yeah, so it's quite a story. I mean, I've always been fascinated about like Alexandra, about the way that the universe communicates, and I thought that it communicates in very cool ways with certain relationships that you can write down and calculate numbers. And I was like, well, if we can communicate in this way, we can also design a world that's much better and more harmonious with the natural world around us. And so I did engineering school. I was doing my undergrad, and I actually got my first internship at Shell. So I was on everybody brace yourself. So I was within the dark side.
Gasp.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
We'll clutch our pearls.
Still recovering. Still recovering. Yeah, and it was a really eye-opening experience. I was working directly in the oil sands, and working on all the kind of siting pipe documents and all this stuff, like drafting all these things on an engineering basis. And then through that experience at Shell, they have this program called the Eco Marathon, which is essentially a car design initiative where it's not about speed, it's about efficiency. It's about how little energy that your car can consume on a specific track. And I learned that my university did not have a team. So I had this really crazy idea to just be like, well, why don't we do this? Again, with no money, no shop space, no team. In the matter of 18 months, we headed down to Detroit, Michigan, and we were the only Canadian team to compete in our category. And through that whole experience, I got a very, very in-depth kind of understanding of energy. Because we had to look at this car, again, not for looks, not for speed, not for all this and that, but all the components on how they use energy. Where is that energy coming from, and how are we using it? And how can we use it in a more efficient way? And that sort of like sparked a lot of ideas for me to get into this industry and prove to myself that I can do it. So on the reflection of, like, for our fellow young people in the audience, by the way, I was in the oil and gas industry. It wasn't for me, and I learned that it wasn't for me. And that's just as important to know what's not for you as knowing what is. And I also don't regret it.
But you probably learned some pretty valuable skills and
Absolutely.
other things necessary to navigate in the industry.
That's right.
And,
That's right.
and same with you, Alexandra. I imagine that experience is essential to navigating that.
Yeah, there was a lot of like transferable skills. Like no matter the industry, I suppose, that there was a lot of professional skills. It was my first real job.
Wow.
So even mastering professional email writing,
Right.
working the internal politics of an organization,
Yeah.
that was really important for me to learn about. And then so after the Eco Marathon, I was like, what do I do with my life? And I decided to do a 2-year master's in renewable energy, where I studied in Sweden and in France, learned all the amazing cool things that Europe is pretty much leading on in getting to net zero. And my idea was to bring a lot of that knowledge here and sort of help our communities establish wind, solar, renewables, you name it, and do it in a good way. So I'm pleased to say that through that, I had another internship through the master's, and it was my good friend Shivani, who's in the audience over here. She actually messaged me, I don't know if it was on Instagram or something, just really randomly, what are you up to these days, Ms. Galquin? And I said, I'm looking for a job. And she was like, okay, cool, come work for Enerstore. And sure enough, 8 months of an internship at Enerstore turned into a career that I'm now 3 years in. I'm really, really proud of the work that we're doing and the vision moving forward.
Amazing. Oh, wow. That's deadly. I'd just like to add, I also started my career as an intern, and getting that experience in mainstream and our industries is so important, and and then you can decide whether or not that is for you or not, and what you want to do with that, and taking it back to community, right? Yeah, amazing. Robert, I'd love to hear more about 7Gen, and I'm sure everyone else would too. What is 7Gen, and how did it start, and what's its mission?
Well, I think it's really interesting because, like, for Alexandra and Muskukwan to be talking about their work and everything, the amazing connections that they built within this industry, I think it's a lot of the focus of 7Gen is about that engagement with Indigenous youth. How are we getting them into clean energy solutions? How are we getting them working alongside for their communities? And the initial idea for 7Gen, it's influenced by the Lakota prophecy of thinking about that 7th generation. And that 7th generation is about leading the change, pushing the fold, having that forward thinking. And when Muskukwan talked about the 200 youth that gathered, that was back in 2019, and that focused on the power of resilience. And for youth to realize the importance of that connection and the resilience that we have in our communities. And ever since then, it's been building with each summit. In 2022, it was focused on the power of kinship and how we need to understand our kin. And that even speaks further to our most recent summit in 2024, which was in Iqaluit, Nunavut, which was focused on infinite voices, shared futures. And that's about the Northern Dialogue. That's about how we're connecting with our remote Northern communities. And a lot of what 7Gen focuses on is that power of gathering, that power of mentorship, capacity building, and being able to build up the youth, the 7Gen youth, and be able to walk alongside them so that they recognize that they are the 7th generation and that they can be connected to the folks that I share the stage with. So.
Wow, that sounds powerful. You touched on some of this already, but what else is driving your work, and what is your why, so to speak?
What is my why? Well, I think for me, I've always been, like with community development, I've been doing a lot of land-based work, a lot of on the land work, and my why has been about in relationship to the land, realizing that there is this notion from, I guess, capitalist Western ideas that it's about consumption. And how are we being in response? I do a lot of like backpacking, canoeing, horseback riding. And a lot of those things are about recognizing what the land is offering and being in relationship to. And once you realize that you're able to be in sync and connected to that, that's when you realize like that idea of healing and realize the why.
Right. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Alexandra, back to you. The work you are a part of is supporting the development of energy projects led entirely by youth. Can you share an example or two of what that's looking like?
Yeah, I mean, I can maybe like back up a little bit from that as well. I think we do support projects led entirely by youth, but we also support, so there's two different programs at ICE that support youth.
Okay.
One of them is our Generation Power program, and I'm just going back to when we talked about Muskogwin's career starting as an intern.
Yeah.
You started as an intern.
Right.
We actually support internship opportunities for Indigenous youth to begin their careers in clean energy, and so I do see that really ramping up and youth being very passionate and wanting to contribute to that space. So we do offer wage subsidies to employers in the clean energy sector to hire Indigenous youth ages 18 to 30 to be employed anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. And we're looking at ways on how can we ensure this youth is very well supported in this place of employment. So that could be in industry, it could be in academia, it could be in government. All of those places of employment look different, and the challenges are going to be different for Indigenous youth in those spaces. But not only that, we are actually seeing Indigenous communities also really take advantage of this opportunity by employing their youth within the community through their nation or through their economic development corps to help build their capacity, or even help get them to help start leading the change within their communities, start helping define what are their energy priorities, what is the energy landscape in the community, what are the needs, how can we engage with community to really develop a plan. And so I'm moving more towards that direction, is supporting communities also from within. I do think it is important for youth to get out there and get that industry experience, but it's just as important to build capacity within Indigenous nations.
Yes.
Yes. And so that kind of slides into our second program. Well, I won't say second because I love both of them. There's no hierarchy, which is imagination. And that's where we support Indigenous youth teams to launch projects that are centered, within their communities, within their values, whatever they see the need for within their community. And so some examples of that include food sovereignty initiatives. This could be solar-powered or biomass-heated greenhouses within their communities for those who maybe don't have access to nutritious foods, or who want to start, cultural revitalization and growing plants and medicines and getting elders involved, getting, high school students involved in learning about solar and just introducing renewable energy into the communities. We have some alumni in the crowd too. Bodena is an intern architect who started a Healing Our Home project where she designed a net zero house.
Wow.
She's actually, she's secured quite a lot of funding to look at the feasibility of that home, and now they're looking at a community-wide housing development that is net zero. So that's grown from the Imagination program. And it's her birthday.
Oh, happy birthday!
Fellow Sagittarius.
The energy is thick in here.
And another example too, Aubrianne is our Imagination manager, and prior to working for ICE, she actually installed a level 2 EV charger in her community with Meadow Lake Tribal Council. So yeah, we do see youth, really wanting to push, change forward through projects, and ICE supports them by offering some project funding. We support them through mentorship and technical advisory, as well as training. So yeah, that's the gist of it.
Great. Ms. Gawquin, can you talk to me about two-way learning, what that means with jobs like yours, and yeah.
Yeah. So the nature of the work that we need to do, I think what we heard this morning, a lot about partnerships and equity partnerships, meaningful relationships that are balanced and healthy and mutually beneficial to everyone involved. We talk about that on a project governance basis, but we can also talk about that on an employer-employee basis as well. And this is sort of the thing that I've really benefited from at my job at Enerstore. I think the fundamental sort of definition or intention of an internship is to, give those skills to this young person. All these like kind of experiences and working with a project, hands-on experience. Use the knowledge that they gained in school to practice. And certainly these are things that I've gained, and I'm very grateful for, and continue to grow in this way with my role. But I also think that what's been so beautiful with my experience there is that there's this learning from the team, this knowledge that I'm able to share in a good way and offer. And I want to tread carefully because it's important that we also acknowledge, that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of like tokenization, for example, and the labor that comes with a single Indigenous person, you name it, like a single queer person or a single woman in a room, and leveraging that person's shared experience, lived experience for the benefit of the entire company. So I want to tread carefully.
Right.
What's been unique about my experience is that it's been respectful. I've never felt tokenized. I've never felt like, I've had to take on the complete burden of explaining Indigenous partnerships. Yet I'm able to share values from where I come from, things like Wekotwin, for example, where we talk about the interconnectedness of everything. And it's sort of like this knowledge sharing that has kind of shifted our company culture a little bit to appreciate what these relationships really mean. And so I really love the bridge building that I get to, have at my job. And certainly this is something that I encourage our young people in the audience, especially. One thing that I was reflecting on was about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And so all that knowledge that I'm saying that I can offer, sometimes I feel like it's not relevant, or it's not good enough, or it's, how is this related to what we're doing? And always doubting myself.
Yeah.
And so the message that I have for our young people in this audience is that your lived experience is so very valuable, and something so needed in a lot of organizations and institutions. And if that isn't honored, I would highly recommend you to reconsider.
Thank you for that.
I would highly recommend that.
I completely agree, and that's a message that I have shared over the years as well. Your lived experience, no matter how good or bad or traumatic or whatever it has been, it's invaluable, and it's needed in this work that we're doing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Thank you for sharing that. Robert, we'll go to you. Indigenous youth represent Canada's fastest growing demographic. Can you comment on pathways for them to work in energy companies and forge careers in the sector?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful how Muskakwan talked about, the imposter syndrome. Student Energy has been doing some really interesting research with Closing the Gap, and they've been able to recognize that 2/3 of youth hesitate to apply for clean energy jobs, and that's just based on ideas of perceived skills and experience within the industry. So I think this really speaks to that centering of traditional ecological knowledge. I think it speaks to community-based work, the experience, and the pillars that need to be a part of this industry. So I think we need to help our youth understand that where they come from has so much healing and has so much powerful work within it. The elders and the knowledge keepers, and the ancestors that they carry with them, that's what's important. And being able to center that, I think is the most important thing for youth to realize.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So let's go back to talking about motivation for this type of work. Ms. Gawquin, in prior discussions for this panel, you emphasized a big driver of the work that you do is healing. Can you expand a bit on that? How is it healing?
Yeah. This is actually like a very recent reflection of mine.
Okay.
I'm very passionate about what we do here at Indigenous Clean Energy. If you see me sort of shedding a tear or two at certain panel discussions or videos showcasing projects, this is real emotional pieces of who I am as to what I value. And you know, when I start being a little bit emotional, I'm sorry I'm so sensitive.
Don't apologize.
Yeah. And, you know, I was like having an internal dialogue. I'm like, you know, why am I crying? Like, you know, this is great, and maybe it's tears of joy, and certainly it is. I also think that when I see you know the home retrofit project, or I see the EV charger installed, or I see the wind turbines being built, I think, you know, I don't necessarily see that. I see the story that is behind how that all came to be. And I don't think I need to tell anyone in this room of you know, where we all came from as Indigenous people in terms of our shared collective history. And there's certainly so much work that needs to be done in our communities. But I can tell you that from a lot of these clean energy stories, that these things are built and it's great and we're getting to net zero. But I also hear so many stories about these champions learning so much about themselves through this entire process, learning about who they are, and what they stand for, and you know, being proud of themselves that they overcame so many challenges in doing this work. Nonetheless, also building bridges within their community, trying to, you know, get the support, for example, and work with chief and councils and work with hunter-trappers organizations, you know, building these relations that otherwise wouldn't have been made without this clean energy project. And for me, that is beautiful, because it is that work that we need to do as communities to heal from this collective shared history that we have. And for me, this is why sometimes you might see me get a little bit emotional.
I totally understand that. Yeah.
I just want to add too that one of Muskogwin has coined the term clean energy begins with good energy. And I think nothing can be truer or further from the truth than that, because you know, we have seen energy projects in the past historically begin with, you know, exploitation, devastation, stolen land, stolen labor, and, you know, that creates a deficit in our societies, in our, you know, in our climate, in our energies as Indigenous peoples. And I think that, you know, if we want to rebalance, you know, what's needed for us to heal, clean energy is a part of that, and doing it in a good way. And I think that when we see Indigenous people leading that change in the way that, you know, creates that healing for them through the kinship that's created, through the partners, the relations that are created, the respect, the honoring of rights, for us, all of that is very healing. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Thank you so much. I was just going to ask if you wanted to add your thoughts on that. Robert, do you want to share your thoughts on that? What does healing mean in this work?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful to reflect on those like relational practices. For these, I can speak from my own experience, just for these two to invite me into the space and to share their knowledge and their experience. It's not just industry knowledge that speaks to, it's the relational practice of like how we're holding space, how we're being in this room, how we've participated in ceremony. I think it's those relational practices that really change the dynamics for youth getting into this space. And that's a super important part for healing for communities that I see. So yeah, I'm grateful to be able to, you know, continue to share space with these two folks.
Amazing. I am going to open up the floor to any questions that any of you may have. Don't think there's any mics, but okay, go ahead.
Hey, nice to meet you. So I'm Julian. Call me Jules, like little Jules. I'm representing Sambake First Nation. So this is a small fly-in community in the Northwest Territories, just a bit north of the BC-Alberta border. I'm needing some advice for how to engage our youth. You know, we're a small community of maybe 70 people. We have maybe 15 youth. We're dealing with youth addiction. We're dealing with trauma. We're dealing with some challenges when it comes to role modeling. You know, we have some really passionate youth who want to do projects, but it makes me emotional. They're struggling to believe in themselves. They're struggling with self-confidence. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for how I can support my fellow youth, and also if you'd be willing to come visit us in Sambake, because I feel inspired by what you're saying, and I think, you know, my youth back home would also feel inspired by getting to meet you.
I don't necessarily have advice, but I do have a story from 7 Gen, the first 7 Gen. We did this kind of like career building workshop with a facilitator, worksheets, groups of youth at tables, talk about what do you want to do in the clean energy space, and how are you going to get there, and who do you need to meet, what kind of schooling do you need, all these things. It was very nice. It was a very nice workshop. And I walked in there, and the facilitator was just like, Ms. Coquin, actually, this is great timing, because there's a group in the back that is just not doing anything. They're quiet, they're not engaging, they're not doing the activity. Go help them. I was like, okay, I have no facilitation experience in this whatsoever. Went to the table, I was like, okay, read the worksheet. Okay, let's do step 1, step 2, nothing. I was like, you know, and we can't force people to do anything, right? So I was just like, okay, well, we don't have to do this if we don't want to. But what I started doing, and I was like, you know what would be a good idea is to talk about my story, at least, if you want and can listen to this. And sure enough, I just unsolicitedly started talking about like where I come from, and a lot of the internal challenges that I had to work through myself, being queer, for example, in high school, and really having that whole coming out process and believing in myself and having a support system, using elements to really call out for help when I need it, and then ultimately realizing who I am and seeing that as not necessarily a curse by any means, but almost a gift, that I'm a very unique person on purpose, and I'm here to be on purpose very unique and different. And it's a beautiful addition to the world in my perspective. And as I was sharing this, the youth started like writing in their worksheets. I don't even know if they were like listening to me anymore, because they were really going into their worksheets.
Wow.
And sure enough, we had a round table. I was like, so it looks like you guys wrote things. Do you want to share? And sure enough, there was mostly the question on motivation. What drives you to do this work, or what can drive you to do this work? A lot of people were very personal about, you know, their family, for example. One youth talked about how they want to make their late Muslim very proud. You know, another youth talked about how they're a new parent and want to make the world better for their kids.
Yeah.
And it was this connection, this heart-to-heart connection that really shone through, I suppose. And I think there's probably something there. I hope that's helpful, because that was a very moving story for me, at least, to carry from that.
Thank you. Do Alexandra or Robert, do you want to add anything?
A few thoughts. I think firstly, those are all, very difficult things to be struggling with. And I do get emotional when I think about it. I think us as Indigenous people, we all have a story of somebody in our lives struggling in that sense, and, with their self-confidence, with addictions, or, with whatever it may be. And I've often thought to myself, we live in this society where we all have gifts, but they aren't always valued or honored in the way that they need to be, in the way they were previously, where we all had a role, we all had a responsibility based on our strength, and it wasn't defined on colonial standards. And so I think where I would start if I were you is in ceremony, because ceremony is healing, ceremony is powerful. I was talking to a youth the other week, and I asked, when you're going through your community engagement processes and you don't have the answers, like, what do you do? And he said he finds his answers in ceremony. And I think that's so powerful, and I think it's also, it's where we start to reclaim our identity, but also where we become grounded and realize, what is it that we are trying to protect? We have to go back to those teachings. We have to go back to the land. Otherwise, we might get lost, in this world of, numbers and finance and revenue, partnership, like all these words, and it's like, okay, but what are we actually doing this for? And I think that's, where they can find themselves, and that sense of identity. But I would love to connect with you afterwards, and I would love to, try to find a way to visit and share our stories, and maybe give you some resources on Indigenous leadership in clean energy, because I think it's also important for them to see themselves reflected in this work.
Me too.
Miigwech, Alexandra. Robert, do you have any advice you want to share?
I think what's been shared, and it's been really powerful, is that idea of storytelling and sharing space. But what I also reflect on for a lot of youth when it comes to engagement is, how are we changing, education spaces? How are we getting dynamic in that way? Land-based practice has always been something that I come back to, and that's the same idea as ceremony. Ceremony can be however many stages that you imagine for your community, and ceremony can also just be offering tobacco and saying thank you and being able to create that space and that relationship. And we always tend to want to solve every problem at once, but taking one step and just being able to build that community around the idea can usually be can sometimes be the most important step. So that's what comes up for me, is storytelling and thinking about how we can change, education spaces. Like sometimes, like even in these conference spaces or like a classroom, I've learned the most when I'm on the land. I've learned the most when I've been able to have time for myself and being able to connect with what really matters. And I think that's what's been amazing about what these folks have shared here just now, is that's what it's about. So, thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Miigwech. Any other questions? We have a few minutes left. Go ahead. Yep, you.
My question is, because you guys all work in the youth, in different sectors, different avenues or whatever. So, working with young people, where do you see them? Have you ever heard or really developing anything or doing anything to address climate change and how that's going to affect, like, where I'm from Treaty 4. So, how is it going to affect the treaties? But if you don't come from a treaty nation, how is it going to affect your Indigenous rights, inherent rights? So in your line of work, have you heard of anything, like any developments, any policies thinking, any future thinking because they're going to be, well, they're already the leaders of today, not tomorrow. So yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. I'm just looking at my cousin right
Because my cousin's always telling me about, kind of what she's working on with her nation, and something that she's brought up. And something also that Aubrianne has had discussions about is this Climate Corps initiative, where, we have positions in community that are climate related, not necessarily clean energy related, but that are part of like environmental monitoring or risk mitigation, or looking at the species and what's happening with those species, looking at the number of animals that, are being hunted, and kind of like just monitoring all of that and making sure that, it's all in balance. Because right now I don't think we have enough of that within community. I wouldn't say that it's something that's, launched at this point, but there are discussions happening even at the federal level regarding this kind of initiative, because I know that young people are demanding, these types of jobs, climate-related jobs that have meaning and purpose within their communities, that help them, reclaim their future. Because given, like, they have every right to be worried about their future, and I think. I think that's really important. I kind of want to call out Jerica to speak, but I don't think she would. Yeah, she's right here. But I know, she's passionate about working on, policy and having discussions, in terms of law development on their, in their nation, and what that looks like for them. So I won't put her on the spot, but
maybe you guys can chat.
Yeah, maybe you two can chat. She's also from Treaty 4, so Treaty 4 girls connect.
Represent.
Yeah.
If I can just add, Danny, I already, I guess, told you this, but for the sake of the room, my kukum told me that because we're descendants of a signatory to Treaty 8, she was telling me, why are you going to all this COP stuff? What's this COP, climate thing, big conference, like big agreements, GHG emission, this and that. So I was, I explained all these things, and she was like, okay, interesting. Interesting that we have to do all this legislation and all this policy making and go to this stage and pledge these contributions, all this stuff, when Treaty 8 has a clause at the very end, and many other treaties too, as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, the waters flow. And that sounds like a nice fuzzy statement, but it's actually a commitment to conserve the natural world around us. And she says it's one of Canada's very first environmental pieces of legislation. So for those of us, policy nerds out there, for sure, we got to do all these things to get our GHG emissions down and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, for me, it's about honoring and respecting where we come from as treaty people.
Oh my gosh. Did you have anything to add, Robert?
I don't know how I'm supposed to follow that one. I'm just gonna ditto that one. That was really great.
Nice.
I think there was someone there that wanted to ask a question.
Hello, kia ora, I'm from New Zealand. My name's Holly. I have been here about a week and I've learned a lot about things. Love renewable energy. In New Zealand, we're 86% renewable energy. My question is, as Māori, I'm Māori, we already start to plan for our mokopuna, our grandchildren, and what our planet looks like, our land. And I have concerns of solar power. Solar power panels last 20 years, they take up a lot of land. What happens to the panels after 20 years? Do you think about that? Do you consider that? What are your thoughts on that? Again, with lithium, with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, it's taking away certain things that they also need. So I'd be keen to hear a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. What does happen to the solar panels after a certain period of time?
You want to answer that?
Sorry.
How about you start?
I'll let Robert.
This one's all you. I love what you have to say about this.
So, I won't say I'm the technical expert in terms of the decommissioning process and the technicals. I do know that, obviously we do think about it as Indigenous people and as Indigenous young people. How are we recycling? How are we reusing? Are we there yet? Is that something that still needs to be researched and figured out? I think, I don't know if there's a clear answer for that right now, but I know something that we talk about at ICE as well is building that global solidarity with our Indigenous kin happen all across the world, because we tend to work in these silos, even, on these pieces of land, even though the supply chain can come from somewhere else and be impacting human rights somewhere else. And so what we really envision is a world where we can have the networks and the solidarity with other Indigenous nations globally to set the standards, to work together in terms of, how are we doing this in a good way that is also benefiting the local community somewhere else? How can we do business together? How can we influence other countries to uplift their Indigenous communities there if the oppression is a lot worse somewhere else? How do we regulate that? How do we, build the standards around that? But yeah, I think that with any technology, as I've said before in other discussions, I think every technology has its benefits. Every technology also has a shadow side to it, no matter what. And so it's just about, what is, unfortunately for me, it's kind of what is the lesser harm at this point. And right now we need to transition from fossil fuels. A lot of our northern communities in Canada are completely reliant on diesel energy. And so, whatever the alternative looks like for them, whether that's solar, wind, battery storage, retrofits, whatever it may be, I guess you could say it's the lesser evil. But you're right, there's still a shadow side to these projects.
Yeah, I think I think it's so it belongs to the nation. It belongs to the people to decide after being informed, of course. And that's the key piece that I want to stress, is being informed and in a neutral sense. What is this solar panel about? Where did those materials come from? What happens to it at the end? And if the community or the nation is leading this project, for example, are there ways that we can modify or change its design such that it's more mindful of mitigating, on both ends, right? And at the end of the day, if the nation decides, actually, you know what, after being informed about where the materials come from, it's not it. Let's look at other things. I mean, for us at EnerStore, we are a storage company, and batteries are the big thing these days, but we're technology agnostic. If lithium isn't the technology that the community doesn't want it, then we'll look at other options, right? And there are a whole host of other technologies emerging, and then we'll evaluate those as well and make an informed decision from there.
Thank you. Robert, you've been saved by the bell because we now have to wrap it up. We're out of time. But I just want to say what a, if you want to take 5 seconds, 10 seconds, okay?
All good.
I just want to say what a privilege it has been to moderate this panel with the three of you, and empowering to hear what amazing work you are all doing. And the future looks and feels a little brighter now, and miigwech for that. And miigwech to everybody for being here, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. I believe we now have 10 minutes to head back over to the main room, so we will carry on.